Let's finish our session on Nahum by looking at chapter 2, starting at verse 1. It says, "An attacker advances against you, Nineveh. Guard the fortress, watch the road, brace yourself, and marshal all of your strength." This is going to continue the vision of vengeance that God had from chapter 1, and he's going to personify this a little bit. But the first thing that he does is he tells them in a mocking tone, go ahead, fortify your city, marshal up all of your troops, get everything ready to come and fight because it will not work. You cannot fight against me. God even mocks them by using a literal term, meaning gird up your loins, stand up, be a man. You can't stand against the wrath of God. And why does he tell them to marshal all of their troops and to get themselves ready? Well, because God is coming at them. He is going to repay them for all of the wickedness that they have done. Look at verse 5 and following. It says, Nineveh summons her picked troops, yet they stumble on the way. They dash to the city walls, the protective shields are put in place, the river gates are thrown open, and the palace collapses. It is decreed that Nineveh be exiled and carried away. Her female slaves moan like doves and beat on their breasts. Nineveh is like a pool whose water is draining away. Stop, stop, they cry, but no one turns back. Plunder the silver, plunder the gold. The supply is endless, the wealth from all of its treasures. She is pillaged, plundered, and stripped. Hearts melt, knees give way, bodies tremble, and every face grows pale. Wow. Notice that verse 5 says that Nineveh is going to cry out to their attackers, please stop, stop. And it says no one will turn back. Nineveh knows full well what this is like because they've been on the other side of that. They've been the aggressor. And when people have cried out to them, stop, don't hurt the women, don't hurt the children, don't plunder our city, they went forward and ravaged them. And now they're the ones that are crying out, stop, stop, and nobody comes to their aid. Nobody listens to them. Verse 10 is a personified poem. Personification means that they're going to take Nineveh and put personal aspects to it. And so it's going to personify Nineveh as a woman. It says that she is pillaged, plundered, and stripped. She's an abused woman. That hearts are going to melt, knees give way, bodies tremble, and every face grows pale. Nineveh is going to be treated like a harlot. She's going to be treated like a prostitute, and nobody cares. That's God's point here, that they have done such wickedness to all of the people in the surrounding nations. They've all feared Nineveh, but now they're going to be treated like a prostitute. The story continues on with more imagery. He says in verse 11, where now is the lion's den, the place where they fed their young, where the lion and lioness went and the cubs without nothing to fear. Nineveh was once this great lion that went out and stalked and got its prey and brought it back home for their cubs to eat, and that is no longer. Nineveh is being reduced down to nothingness. Later, it says in verse 13, and the sword will devour your young lions. If you remember back in chapter 1, verse 14, it says that when God destroys Nineveh, he will leave absolutely no descendants. There will be no young lions to go out and get prey any longer. Nineveh will be destroyed. And the chapter ends with the voices of your messengers will no longer be heard. Now, if you remember in our last session, chapter 1 ended with this cry from messengers from Israel's side that are going on the mountaintops, and the feet are bringing good news. And this messenger would run back to the king and say, hey, everything's great. We're winning. That kind of imagery is for Israel of celebration, that they could go back to their festivals. But now look at this verse. It says, the voices of your messengers will no longer be heard. This is called an inclusio. It's bookends here to keep all of this thought together and pushed together, so to speak. And so the voices of the messengers in Israel are going to be shouting for joy, while the voices of the messengers of Nineveh will be silenced. An inclusio here. And now in chapter 3, a vision continues, only this is a vision of vindication. This vindication is evidence that God's actions are right and reasonable and that they're justified. Look at what he says. Woe to the city of blood, full of lies, full of plunder, never without victims. This woe is a death cry. It's a grief wail. Woe, woe to this city of blood, because all this torture is going to be coming upon it. And why? Well, it continues to say that there are countless dead bodies. People stumble over the corpses, all because of the wanton lust of a prostitute, the alluring mistress of sorcery, who enslaved the nations by her prostitution and people by her witchcraft. Nineveh is being compared once again to a prostitute that people have been drawn to. They love Nineveh's power and prestige. They're the most powerful city in the most powerful nation on the planet at the time, and people are drawn into it like a prostitute. But then in verse 5 and 6 is some of the most strong language that you'll find in all of the prophets. It says, I am against you, declares the Lord Almighty. I will lift up your skirts over your face. I will show the nations your nakedness and the kingdoms your shame. I will pelt you with filth. I will treat you with contempt and make a spectacle of you. This is a description of how people in the ancient times would treat adulteresses or prostitutes at that time. It says that they'll lift their skirts up over their face. That's what they would do in a mocking sense of somebody that has committed adultery. It also says that the nations are going to see Nineveh's nakedness. This is more personification here, that they are going to be exposed and laid bare. It continues to say, I will pelt you with filth, that they will be hit with excrement. It's disgusting that they will be treated with contempt and be made a spectacle. Nineveh's glory would be reduced to the worst and nastiest of filth. That's what's being said here. They were once attractive and powerful, much like a prostitute, but now they're as worthless as human excrement, as filth. And why? Why all of this? Well, after Nineveh is treated as a prostitute and is humiliated, she will continue to be punished in other ways. According to verse 10 in chapter 3, it says, infants will be dashed upon the rocks. They will cast lots for your nobles so that they could be tortured, and great men would be put in chains. The king of Nineveh, King Assurbanipal, has been known to capture leaders and actually put them in dog chains and make them sleep in dogs' kennels. And now all of that would happen back upon their own heads. It would happen to them. And so let's turn to the very end, the last two verses of chapter 3, to see what God says to the king. He actually delivers a personal message to the king. It says, King of Assyria, your shepherds slumber, your nobles lie down to rest. Your people are scattered on the mountains, and no one will gather them. Nothing can heal you. Your wound is fatal. This personal message is to the king saying, hey, all of your leaders are laying down on the job, and while they're sleeping, somebody else is going to come in and ravage you, that you are going to receive a fatal wound. And we know in 612 BC that Nineveh is completely leveled and destroyed. And then 605, all of Assyria, the entire nation, will fall to Babylon, that it will be completely over. And look at what it says when that happens. God predicts through Nahum, all who hear the news about you will clap their hands at your fall. For who has not felt your endless cruelty? Man, what a wild ride through Obadiah and Nahum. We can learn a few things from this book. Let's just take a big picture here at our study. And one, we serve a God of the nations, that no matter how powerful a country become, our God is in complete control. Even when that power is used for endless cruelty, that God will level them and people will clap their hands when they are destroyed, because he is ridding the earth of evil and bringing peace on earth once again. And another thing that we can learn is just this idea that the God of the Old Testament is mean and harsh and cruel. But then when Jesus comes, God is graceful and nice and fun. And I think that's a complete false dichotomy. And we've talked about this a little bit in our study, but I want to re-emphasize it again from a verse in the New Testament. Romans chapter 11, verse 12 tells us to consider the kindness and the sternness of God. That Romans is meshing those two things together, that we cannot separate God out to just be one-sided. He's not a one-sided God. He's not all wrath over here and all love over here in the New Testament. He's our God. He's complete and whole with all of his attributes working together. And when we consider the sternness and the kindness of God, well, my study Bible notes say that when we ignore God's kindness, God seems like this ruthless tyrant that's on a rampage. But then when we ignore his sternness, he seems like a negligent and enabling father. God is neither of those things. His kindness and his sternness works together. Remember, we see so much of God's sternness in the book of Nahum, but Nahum's name means comfort. That this is actually a book that's bringing comfort to Israel. How so? Well, because we serve a God who snaps yokes and shatters shackles, that he actually frees Israel from the tyranny of a nation like Assyria. The Ninevites are leveled because of their cruelness on earth. Our vengeful God keeps his promises to protect the innocent and the vulnerable and to free his children who he loves. We serve a God of comfort. And there's times where God brings that comfort through his vengeance. And by doing so, he wipes every tear from our eyes, and he will make all the wrongs on this earth right in the very end.